Things never blow up all at once. They build. They grow slowly, sneak up on you when you're not looking, like a splinter that you didn't even notice at first. That's exactly how things started with Camilla and me. For a long time, I thought we had the perfect marriage. It wasn't all roses every day, what marriage is. But 5 years in, I felt good. She was my wife, my partner, and I thought we had each other's backs. We'd build a good life together. I'm a programmer. Nothing fancy, just good enough to pay the bills, afford a decent place, and take vacations now and then. Camilla, on the other hand, is sharp. A lawyer. She's the type of person who can win an argument even if she knows she's wrong, just by sheer will. That's one of the things that used to attract me to her. How quick her mind is. But over time, that sharpness started to feel like a double-edged sword. I noticed it especially when she talked to me like I was a child, correcting me over small things, making jokes at my expense in front of others. It wasn't always bad. Sometimes it was playful, but other times it stung. And lately, the sting was becoming more frequent. We had a solid group of friends, about 10 of us, and we were always doing things together, trips, barbecues, late-night parties. There was this closeness that felt comforting. I never thought I'd have to second-guess any of them. There was Mike, the jokester who always had something outrageous to say, and Lisa, who'd talk your ear off about work. Chris liked to debate politics over drinks, and then there was Tessa, who, well, she was something else, smart, funny, beautiful. But back then, I didn't think much of her beyond friendship. I only had eyes for Camilla, or so I thought. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. The small things that didn't seem like much at the time. I noticed that Camilla's phone started buzzing more often, and she was always texting, more than usual. At first, I told myself I was just being paranoid. People text, right? It's normal. But there was one name that kept popping up, Mike. I told myself they were just friends. Mike was funny. Everyone liked him. But the way she lit up when she talked to him, it wasn't the same as when she talked to me. I tried to brush it off, but you know how your gut tells you something even when your brain says you're crazy? It was like that. I started catching little moments between them. A glance here, a joke there, stuff that, on the surface, looked innocent enough. But once you start noticing things, you can't unsee them. They were too comfortable with each other. I'd hear them laugh about adventures or inside jokes that I wasn't a part of. And Camilla, she looked at him with this glimmer in her eye, the same one she used to have for me when we first started dating. Things came to a head when we planned a weekend trip to celebrate our 5-year anniversary. All of us, our entire group, decided to book a resort together. It was supposed to be this perfect getaway, but honestly, I could feel the tension before we even left. Camilla seemed distracted. Every time I tried to talk to her about the trip or the anniversary, she'd smile that tight, fake smile like she was tolerating me. And there were times I'd catch her texting right in the middle of a conversation, always with that same smirk she saved for Mike's messages. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. I convinced myself I was just being insecure, that this was all in my head. It was our anniversary trip, for God's sake. She wouldn't do anything to ruin that. Would she? The first night at the resort started off great. We had everyone in our room for drinks, and the energy was high. Everyone laughing, the music pumping, glasses clinking. Mike was in his element, telling stories, making people howl with laughter. Camilla? She was sitting right next to him. Not near him. Next to him. Their knees touched, and she didn't pull away. At that point, I had a few too many drinks to think clearly. You know how it is when you start drinking. Your emotions are heightened, and every little thing feels like a big deal. So when I saw them sitting so close, I felt this knot twist in my stomach. I told myself to relax, that it was just friendly banter. But damn, it was hard. The booze hit me harder than I expected, so I decided to call it a night early. I stumbled off to the bedroom, leaving everyone else to party. The last thing I remember before passing out was hearing Camilla's laughter. That same carefree laugh I used to be so proud of. Except this time, it wasn't for me. It was for him. It's weird how when you start doubting someone, even their most innocent actions feel suspicious. Lying there in bed, half asleep, I couldn't shake the image of Camilla with Mike. I told myself I was being stupid, that I should trust my wife. But deep down, something didn't feel right. You know that feeling when you can sense a storm coming, but there's nothing you can do to stop it? That's exactly how it felt. Like the life I thought I had was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. At that moment, I didn't realize just how far things would spiral. I had no idea that this was only the beginning. But looking back now, that night at the resort, the laughter, the stolen glances, the texts, that's when I should have known. That's when I should have confronted her. Maybe things would have turned out differently if I had. But instead, I did what most people do. I ignored the signs. I told myself everything was fine, and by the time I realized it wasn't, it was already too late. I woke up to the sound of muffled voices and music bleeding through the thin walls. My head throbbed from all the drinks earlier, but something about the noise pulled me from sleep. It wasn't just chatter. It was louder, more chaotic. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 3 a.m. The laughter, the strange moaning, it didn't feel right. At first, I thought maybe the group was still partying. Maybe I was being paranoid again. But something gnawed at me, that same gut feeling I'd been trying to suppress for weeks. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and tried to shake the drowsiness from my mind. The noise was coming from the room next door, Mike's room. The knot in my stomach tightened. I got out of bed, heart racing, and made my way toward the door. I kept telling myself I was being stupid, that this was nothing. Maybe I just needed some water. I'd walk in, grab a drink, and laugh at myself for being so damn paranoid. But as soon as I opened that door, everything changed. What I saw froze me in place. There, right in front of me, was my wife, Camilla, the woman I'd promised my life to, in the middle of an orgy with our friends. The scene was surreal. People tangled together, kissing, moaning, completely lost in each other. There was Mike, hands all over Camilla. Tessa was somewhere in the mess, and even Chris, of all people, looked like he was having the time of his life. I stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend what the hell I was seeing. It felt like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of my lungs. My hands trembled, but somehow, almost instinctively, I reached for my phone. I needed proof. Proof that this nightmare was real, that I wasn't just imagining things. I hit record, capturing the scene, the writhing bodies, the moaning, the way Camilla was all over Mike. It was disgusting. My wife, the person I trusted most, was part of this. The sounds overwhelmed me. Laughter, groaning, music blaring from someone's phone. No one noticed me standing there, frozen like a ghost at the door. They were too wrapped up in their little game, too far gone to care that I was watching. And then, just as I was about to step back and leave, Camilla looked up. Our eyes locked. I'll never forget the look on her face. Shock, guilt, and panic all mixed into one. She scrambled to her feet, shoving Mike aside, and ran toward me, pulling me into the hallway. Edward, wait. Please, just let me explain. Her voice was frantic, her hands clutching my arm as if that would somehow make things better. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the words coming out of her mouth. She kept saying it wasn't what it looked like, that I didn't understand. But how the hell was I supposed to interpret that? It's not new. It's been part of our group for years, she stammered, her voice cracking. Even before we got married. I wanted to tell you, but I thought you wouldn't understand. I thought you'd leave me. She had tears in her eyes now, big, glistening drops sliding down her cheeks. But all I could feel was anger, a burning rage spreading through my chest. She'd been lying to me for years. Everything about us, our marriage, our life together, was built on a foundation of deceit. You mean this shit has been happening all along? And you never thought to tell me? I could hear my own voice rising, but I didn't care. I was scared, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want to lose you. Lose me? I scoffed, the disbelief and anger boiling over. You lost me the second you decided to lie about it. Don't you get that, Camilla? There's no coming back from this. She kept apologizing, kept saying she loved me, that it didn't mean anything, that I was still the one she wanted. But how could I believe her? How could I trust a single word that came out of her mouth after what I'd just seen? The tears, the apologies, they meant nothing. Nothing could undo what I had witnessed. I stood there, numb, as she begged me to understand. But all I could feel was the weight of betrayal, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest. I looked at her one last time, and all I saw was a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had been lying to me from the very beginning. Without saying another word, I turned and walked back into our room. I left her standing there in the hallway, sobbing, trying to piece together an excuse for the inexcusable. But it didn't matter anymore. My world had already crumbled, and there was no putting it back together. I sat on the edge of the bed, still gripping my phone. The video was saved, sitting there in my gallery, a cruel reminder of the moment everything fell apart. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, realizing that nothing would ever be the same again. I don't know how long I sat there, numb, lost in my thoughts. Minutes? Hours? Time stopped making sense. All I knew was that I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't breathe without feeling that weight pressing down on me. She came back into the room eventually, her face blotchy from crying. She sat down next to me, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. "Edward," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please. I love you. I know I messed up, but we can get through this, can't we?" Her words cut through me like a knife. Get through this? How? How do you rebuild something after it's been shattered into a million pieces? How do you move on from betrayal, so deep it leaves scars that never heal? I didn't have an answer for her then, and honestly, I still don't. All I knew was that the life I thought I had, the marriage I thought was real, was gone, and there was no going back. The next morning hit me like a freight train. I woke up feeling like I'd been hit in the head, and not just from the hangover. My mind raced, trying to process everything I'd seen the night before. Images of Camilla, tangled up with Mike and the others, replayed over and over in my head like some sick movie I couldn't turn off. How the hell had I been so blind? How could I not have seen it? I thought I knew her, thought I knew us, but apparently I didn't know a damn thing. The weight of betrayal was suffocating. It felt like my brain was on fire, burning with 1,000 questions that I knew I'd never get honest answers to. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how the woman I'd shared my life with could do something like this. And worse, how had everyone else acted like it was nothing? Were they really that comfortable with it? When I finally dragged myself out of bed and into the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I looked wrecked, eyes bloodshot, face pale, hair sticking up in every direction. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would wake me up from this nightmare. But the reality stuck like a dagger. This wasn't a dream. It was real, and it wasn't going away. After a few minutes of standing there, motionless, I heard movement outside. The others were awake, and breakfast plans were being made. The last thing I wanted was to sit down at a table with them, pretending like everything was fine. But avoiding them wasn't an option. I wasn't about to give Camilla, or Mike, the satisfaction of thinking they'd won. Not yet. When I walked into the dining area, I felt the tension immediately. Everyone acted like it was just another day, like nothing had happened. They were chatting, laughing, as if they weren't all part of the most twisted thing I'd ever seen the night before. And then there was Camilla. She sat right across from Mike, casually stirring her coffee, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Mike leaned in close to her, whispering something that made her chuckle. That sound, her laugh, grated on me like nails on a chalkboard. It was the same laugh she used to give me. Now it belonged to him. I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Every glance, every shared joke between them was like gasoline poured onto the fire burning inside me. But I forced myself to stay calm, to sit there and play along, even though every muscle in my body screamed for me to flip the table and walk out. I tried asking a few of the others about what had happened, just to see if anyone would tell me the truth. But every time I brought it up, they dodged the conversation like pros. They'd laugh it off, make some vague excuse, or pretend not to hear me. It was like they were all in on this unspoken pact to never talk about it. Lisa was the only one who seemed to notice how off I was. She pulled me aside at one point, away from the others, and gave me this sympathetic look. "You okay, Edward?" she asked, her voice low enough that no one else could hear. "What do you think?" I snapped, but not at her, at everything. She sighed, crossing her arms. "Look, I know it's a lot to take in, but we've all been close for years. This is just how it's always been. Close." I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. So close that my wife and her friends screw each other behind my back. Lisa didn't flinch. If anything, she looked almost tired, like she'd had this conversation a dozen times before. I'm not saying it's right, Edward. I'm saying it's complicated. You just need to keep your eyes open. You don't want to end up on the losing side of this. Losing side? I hissed. This isn't a damn game, Lisa. She gave me a look. One of those long, knowing looks that say more than words ever could. I didn't know what she meant by it at the time, but I'd soon find out. Later, when I finally got Camilla alone, I asked her the one question that had been eating away at me all morning. Why? She looked at me, almost bored, like she'd been expecting it. It's not like I cheated on you, Edward. This is just part of us. Part of the group. Part of the group? I repeated, feeling like the words were poison. You think it's okay because it's part of the group? What the hell kind of logic is that? She rolled her eyes, and that little gesture nearly sent me over the edge. It's not a big deal. It's just sex. It doesn't change how I feel about you. Not a big deal? I could barely contain the rage bubbling up inside me. You call what I saw last night not a big deal? You lied to me, Camilla. For years. I didn't lie, she said calmly, as if we were discussing something as trivial as what to eat for dinner. I just didn't tell you. That was the moment it hit me, how deeply our relationship had changed. Or maybe it had never been what I thought it was. Maybe she'd always been like this, and I was just too blind to see it. Is it still happening? I asked, my voice cold and flat. She shrugged like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes. Not all the time. It's just something we do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And you didn't think to ask if I was okay with that? I knew you wouldn't be, she said, without an ounce of regret. That's why I didn't tell you. I stood there, staring at her, trying to wrap my head around the sheer audacity of it all. She didn't even apologize. Not really. To her, this wasn't betrayal. It was just part of her life, our life, whether I liked it or not. It was in that moment, standing in front of her, that I realized something. The woman I thought I loved, the woman I thought I knew, didn't exist. The Camilla I married was a figment of my imagination. The real Camilla was someone else entirely, a stranger who had been hiding in plain sight all these years. And just like that, I knew there was no coming back from this. Not now. Not ever. I couldn't live with the anger anymore. It burned inside me, twisting my thoughts, making it impossible to think about anything other than Camilla and Mike, and the disgusting betrayal they'd wrapped in a neat little bow of it's just sex. I needed to do something. Sitting around, pretending to be okay, wasn't working. Every time I saw Camilla, all I could hear was her dismissive tone. It doesn't change how I feel about you. Those words echoed in my head like a bad song I couldn't turn off. That's when Tessa reached out. She must have noticed how miserable I looked during breakfast, or maybe saw the way I avoided Camilla like the plague. Either way, she pulled me aside, and I guess part of me just needed anyone to listen. We met up in the hotel bar later that evening, away from the others. I wasn't planning on telling her everything, but once I started, it all came pouring out. I told her about what I'd seen, about Camilla's betrayal, about how lost I felt. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but Tessa listened without judgment, her eyes soft with empathy. You don't deserve that, she said quietly when I finished. You deserve better, Edward. Hearing someone say that, it did something to me. I hadn't realized how desperate I was for validation, for someone to remind me that I wasn't crazy, that what Camilla did wasn't normal or okay. We ended up talking for hours. She told me things about the group I never knew. How this wasn't the first time someone had been left in the dark, how some couples thrived on secrets while others fell apart. You're not the only one, you know, she whispered, her hand resting on mine. But that doesn't make it right. At some point, the conversation shifted. I'm not sure how, but suddenly we weren't just talking anymore. Tessa leaned closer, her perfume filling the space between us, her hand lingering a little too long on mine. And just like that, something clicked. It was as if the anger and betrayal inside me needed an outlet, and Tessa was right there, willing and waiting. Before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't soft or romantic. It was desperate, fueled by everything I'd kept bottled up since the moment I walked in on that nightmare. That night with Tessa wasn't about love. It was about escape. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the world was crashing down on me. I wasn't thinking about Camilla or Mike or any of the bullshit they dragged me into. It was just me and Tessa, tangled together in a bed that didn't belong to Camilla, in a space where, for a few hours, nothing else mattered. When the sun crept through the curtains the next morning, I expected to feel guilty. But I didn't. If anything, I felt lighter, like I'd finally taken something back. Tessa stirred beside me, brushing her hair out of her face, and gave me a sleepy smile. "What now?" she asked softly, as if she knew this wasn't just a fling. That's when the idea hit me. If Camilla thought she could drag me into this mess without consequences, she had another thing coming. I wasn't going to sit back and let her get away with it. I was going to expose her in front of everyone. Tessa didn't try to talk me out of it. If anything, she seemed almost excited by the plan. "They deserve it," she said, her voice filled with quiet rage. "You deserve to be heard." With Tessa by my side, I felt unstoppable. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing Camilla that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. We returned to the resort later that afternoon. Most of the group was lounging by the pool, drinks in hand, acting like nothing had happened. Camilla was there, of course, sitting next to Mike with that same easy smile she used to wear just for me. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. Tessa gave me a reassuring nod, and I knew it was time. I stepped forward, clearing my throat loud enough to catch everyone's attention. "Hey, everyone," I called out, my voice steady even though my heart pounded in my chest. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." Camilla's smile faltered. Mike shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The others exchanged awkward glances, sensing the tension but unsure of what was coming next. "I know what you've all been doing," I continued, my gaze locked on Camilla. "And I think it's time everyone else knows too." Camilla shot to her feet, panic flashing in her eyes. "Edward, don't." But it was too late. I pulled out my phone and played the video for everyone to see. The screen lit up with the images of last night's orgy, the sounds of moaning and laughter filling the air. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, awkward shuffling, some people turning their faces away in embarrassment. Camilla stood frozen, her face draining of color as the truth unraveled right in front of her. "You thought you could keep this from me," I said, my voice low but filled with venom. "You thought I'd never find out. But here we are." Mike tried to jump in, but I shut him down with a glare. "Don't even think about it," I warned. Camilla stammered, her hands trembling. It wasn't like that. I mean, it was, but it didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. "Didn't mean anything? You got a hell of a way of showing that." She tried to spin it, tried to convince everyone that I was overreacting. But the damage was done. No one could unsee the video, and no amount of smooth talking from Camilla could change what they just witnessed. The group sat in stunned silence, their carefully crafted world cracking under the weight of the truth. Mike looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Camilla, for the first time since I'd met her, looked genuinely afraid. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice cold and calm. "All the lies, the secrets. Was it worth losing me?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had nothing. No excuse, no apology that could fix what she'd broken. Tessa stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm, and in that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Camilla had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. Not this time. I turned to leave, Tessa following close behind. As we walked away from the stunned silence of the group, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. The truth was out. The game was over. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. That night, I sat alone in the dim hotel room, my phone glowing in my hand. Camilla had tried one last time to smooth things over, standing there with that pitiful, fake remorse dripping from her voice. "It was just a temporary weakness," she had whispered, as if saying it out loud made it any better. "It didn't mean anything, Edward. We can work through this." Work through what, exactly? The years of lies? The way she betrayed me and tossed me aside like I didn't matter? I was done. I could feel the rage bubbling just beneath the surface, coiling tighter and tighter with every word she spoke. I knew I had to do something that would make sure she felt the same humiliation she had inflicted on me. There was no reasoning with someone like her. No apology or excuse would ever be enough. She had taken everything from me, my trust, my pride, and now I was going to take something from her, her reputation. My hands shook as I unlocked my phone. The video was still there, waiting. The audio captured everything. The laughter, the moans, the way they had all been so comfortable, so at ease in their betrayal. I started editing, cutting out the parts that didn't matter, focusing on the most damning moments. The sound of Camilla's laughter with Mike, the unmistakable way they touched each other, the look in her eyes, like I was a ghost, already forgotten. Every frame of that video was like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. But instead of wallowing in the pain, I let it fuel me. I wasn't just going to expose her to our friends. I wanted the whole damn world to know who Camilla really was. When the edit was finished, I hesitated for only a second. There was a part of me, buried deep beneath the rage, that whispered I was crossing a line. That posting this video would unleash something I couldn't control. But that part of me had been ignored for too long. Camilla had chosen to betray me in the worst way possible. Now it was my turn to show her the consequences. With a deep breath, I hit upload. Within minutes, the video exploded online. The comments started pouring in, some shocked, others gleefully tearing into the people in the video. Camilla's name spread like wildfire. People who knew us, co-workers, acquaintances, even old friends began sharing the video, tagging her and the rest of the group. The things people said were brutal. Laughter, insults, crude jokes. Camilla was now a punchline in a joke that wouldn't end. And it didn't stop with her. The fallout rippled through our entire circle of friends. Everyone in that video found themselves at the center of a storm they hadn't seen coming. Trust shattered, accusations flew, and those who used to be inseparable now turned on each other. The same people who had laughed together the night before were suddenly at each other's throats, desperate to shift blame, desperate to salvage their own reputations. At first, I felt relief, maybe even a little satisfaction. It was cathartic in a way to know that they couldn't sweep this under the rug, that the truth was out there, raw and undeniable. But that relief was fleeting. Almost immediately, the backlash began. The messages started small. Former friends, furious and defensive, told me I'd crossed a line, that I'd gone too far. But then the threats began, anonymous texts warning me to take the video down or else. People I once considered close started turning against me, calling me the real villain, saying I was the one who destroyed everything. It didn't matter to them that I had been the one betrayed. In their eyes, I was the problem now. I had exposed their dirty little secret, and they weren't going to forgive me for it. Camilla, of course, was livid. She came storming into the room later that night, her face twisted in anger. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, her voice hoarse with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My career, my life. You've ruined everything. You still here, emotionless." "Good," I said simply. She looked at me like I was a monster, but I didn't care. She kept yelling, blaming me, saying I'd overreacted, that I was the one who'd taken things too far. "This isn't fair," she cried, as if fairness had ever been a part of what she did to me. "Fair?" I scoffed. "You lied to me for years. You humiliated me. And now you want to talk about fair?" Her anger turned to something uglier, resentment, pure and raw. "You think this makes you the hero?" she spat. "You think ruining me makes you better?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not the hero. But at least now, everyone knows who you really are." Her face crumpled with rage, and for the first time, I saw her without the mask, without the charming lawyer persona, without the sweet wife routine. All that was left was a bitter, selfish woman who couldn't stand the idea of losing control. She tried everything after that, begging, threatening, trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty. But the thing is, you can't manipulate someone who has nothing left to lose. And I had lost everything, thanks to her. As she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I knew that things were far from over. The threats, the backlash, the fallout, it was all coming, and it was coming fast. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. There was no going back, no undoing what I had done. But that was the point, wasn't it? I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to pretend that everything was okay. Because it wasn't. And now, thanks to that video, everyone knew the truth. Let them talk. Let them judge. I didn't care anymore. All that mattered was that I was free. It was only a matter of days before the fallout reached a boiling point. The video did exactly what I intended. Ripped through every lie Camilla had built, exposed her and Mike for what they were. But with that exposure came consequences I hadn't fully anticipated. Camilla was drowning. Her carefully curated reputation as a successful lawyer, the doting wife, the charming social butterfly gone. Clients pulled away, colleagues whispered behind her back, and our so-called friends turned on her. The very people she thought she could manipulate were the first to throw her under the bus. She came to see me a few days after the video hit the internet. I could tell the moment I opened the door. She was different. No more arrogance. No fake smiles. Just a woman on the verge of breaking. She stood there with red-rimmed eyes and shaky hands, trying to piece together the mess she had made. "Edward," she began, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk. Please." I let her in more out of curiosity than anything else. She sat down on the couch, clutching her hands together like they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "We can fix this," she said, forcing a hopeful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know things got out of hand, but we've been through so much together. I love you, Edward. We can get past this." I stared at her, feeling a strange mix of pity and disgust. How could she still think love had anything to do with this? How could she believe that after everything, we could just put the pieces back together? "There's no way anymore, Camilla," I said, my voice flat. "You broke us, and there's no going back." Her expression crumbled, the tears coming fast now. "It was a mistake," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't think you'd understand." "You're right," I replied, my tone cold. "I don't understand. I never will." She begged for us to try again, to rebuild what was left of our marriage. But there was nothing left to rebuild. Trust doesn't come back after something like this. It was like trying to patch up a shipwreck with duct tape. "I can't live like this, Camilla," I said finally. "And I don't think you can either." Her face twisted with a mix of anger and sorrow, but she didn't argue. I think deep down she knew it was over too. By the time she left, any trace of pity I had for her was gone. I was done. Done with her lies, her manipulation, her games. It was time to move on for both of us. The next day, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Sitting in that sterile office, going over the details of our split, was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about dividing assets or signing papers. It was the end of everything I thought my life was supposed to be. But as painful as it was, it also felt like the first step toward freedom. The legal process dragged on, filled with moments of frustration and stress, but I could feel the weight lifting bit by bit. Each form I signed, each meeting with my lawyer, brought me closer to being free of Camilla and the toxic circle she dragged me into. I realized I didn't just want to leave her. I wanted to leave everything behind. Through it all, Tessa was there. She became the steady presence I didn't know I needed. We spent hours talking about everything, my anger, my fears, my regrets. She listened without judgment, offering quiet support when I needed it most. And slowly, she helped me see that this wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of something new. Our relationship, which had started as an escape, turned into something real. We didn't rush it, didn't force anything. It just grew naturally, like two broken pieces finding a way to fit together. Tessa wasn't just a distraction from the pain. She became my anchor, the person who reminded me that life didn't end with betrayal. The divorce was finalized a few months later. I signed the last of the papers with a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was done. Camilla was officially out of my life, and I was free to start over. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reevaluating everything. I quit the job that had kept me chained to the same routines for years. I started traveling, just small trips at first, then further and further, exploring places I'd only dreamed about. I met new people, made new friends, and discovered parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. Tessa joined me on some of those trips, and together we built something new, something that wasn't weighed down by lies or betrayal. She never tried to replace what I lost, and I never asked her to. What we had was different, and that was okay. It was real. One evening, sitting on a beach far away from the life I once knew, I thought back to everything that had happened. The betrayal, the revenge, the divorce, it all seemed like a lifetime ago. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Betrayal changes you. It breaks you down, forces you to confront the parts of yourself you didn't know existed. But it also gives you the chance to rebuild, to start over with a clearer understanding of who you are and what you want. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness, the rage, it was gone. All that was left was a strange sense of gratitude. Not for what Camilla did, but for what it taught me. She had tried to break me, but in the end, I was still standing. Stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. With that thought, I stood up, brushing the sand off my hands. It was time to move forward, to leave the past where it belonged. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready for whatever life had in store. And this time, I knew I wouldn't let anyone take that away from me.